Yes. Okay, good day, everybody. Okay, good day, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this first Curaçao Data Days. We have a very, very exciting program, to say the least. So for our first speaker, I'd like to introduce him. When we were on the look for very interesting speakers and topics in the domain of data, we came across a name, Pito Salas, and upon closer look, this is a Curaçao-born a person who is the father of the pivot table. So for anybody that has spent any amount of time in Excel and has used this functionality, which is broadly used right now in Excel, it's the baby, the brainchild of Pito Salas. Very likable character. He's a professor at Brandeis University. And for this first session, we'd like to ask him to explain to us his journey from the conception of this functionality. Pito also has a second session on Friday about education and getting the youth excited about technology. We believe that's also a key part in the development for digitalization and data literacy. So with that, I'd like to introduce Pito Salas.
Bom dia, Trene. Mita cominciare a papiamento, mas que me saco no Trene da papiamento, pero eenmaal die comincia papi inglês, bloqueer ik met americano. Que men dispa bewijs comita echt uur of zo, mita comincia aqui nada. Let me share my screen hoor. Okay. Jammer come un po' in audience di quanto gente team, pero anyway, danke per introduction, danke per invitation. Mit hope flattered with the goza the chance to buy down memory lane. So now I'm going to become American. So who am I? Well, I went to Johan van Waalwijk School for eerste class, etc. Then I went to Pito Salas College, what was called that then. I was born in 1955. And my father's business, some of you old people on the call might remember Pito Salas. I did a lot of summer jobs there and so on, but then, you know, much to the disappointment of my parents, I went off to the United States for college. And there I studied computer science, and I worked at several US companies that those two are both no longer around. Lotus Development, which was huge in its time, that's what I'm going to be talking about, and then even technology. And then now I'm back at Brandeis, believe it or not. So let's get into it. So what is a pivot table, right? I mean, I hope that most of you know what a pivot table is, because it's really impossible to explain, and that's kind of the problem. Yes, son, a pivot table would be quicker, but I've told my boss his stance on things that he does not understand. He doesn't want me to use those things. Or I spent 12 hours on that Excel report and now my boss wants to change. So that's what pivot tables do for people. That's the good that comes out of it. Here's one picture, just in case, that you might have seen. It looks like Excel on Windows. Hopefully it's the latest, because I don't use Excel myself. I use Google Sheets. But anyway, this is what the pivot table looks like. And funny fact is that the word pivot table came from Excel. When we came up with the product, originally had nothing as ingenious a term. I think we called it something like updatable views or something like that. The concept in Excel is very similar to ours, although we had two other major components to the concepts, which Excel did not copy until recently, I think, which was the writing of formulas without using cell addresses. Again, a little bit of jargon for you, but if you're all spreadsheet hacks junkies, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm going to try to tell you a little bit of how it happened. Certainly Excel now is light years beyond what we had, but the germ started way back then. So this is now about 1980, 85, maybe something like that. And I'm working at a company called Lotus Development, which was super big in that time. Lotus 123 was one of the original spreadsheets, and certainly the biggest and most popular one by far at the time. We dominated the business. And I worked in a department called the Advanced Technology Group, where we were doing ostensibly research and development. And I didn't really have an assignment. I just was trying to figure out what would be interesting to work on, what would be useful for the company. And I set this objective for myself. I wanted to know really how people use spreadsheets. And you look on the right there, I dug up this book on eBay. I'm the picture of the book. You don't find a lot of books these days about how to use spreadsheets. Maybe you do, I don't think so though. But in those days, it was a whole study. You could take courses, you could take seminars. They would teach you how to use, absolute and relative references in the best way and how to avoid errors in spreadsheets, which was a big problem then. And ironically, it is still a big problem. That is to say that there are still errors that people discover at the last minute or many years later. And you probably all know about this. Don't tell your boss, but probably there's a mistake in your spreadsheet. And so that was really interesting to me, coming from a computer science background, wondering, well, why is that? Why is this tool that everybody uses have these problems? And so I started reading these books like Advanced Spreadsheet Design using Lotus Macros and many others. And I started seeing that there were things that came up over and over again. Techniques for avoiding accidentally clobbering formulas. Techniques for structuring your information in many different ways, using formulas to make references between different areas and so on. And again, from a computer science point of view, I started thinking about programming languages and structured approaches to dealing with data. This is 85 now, and I'm like 10 years out of college. I'm 30 years old, I'm not about 85, I was 30 years old, but that's the year. I don't remember the dates exactly. I'll have a little timeline in a second. I was thinking, well, I'm in research and development at Lotus, and what can we do to create the next generation of spreadsheets? How can we leapfrog our competitors? Because everybody at that time obviously is trying to shoot at the leader. And particularly, how can we make spreadsheets more powerful and useful? And I have that little clip of a sentiment that we often told our colleagues when they said, wait a second, you can't do that. It's going to cannibalize business from our flagship from 123. You have to just, you can only work on 123. And the slogan was, you should make your own products obsolete before somebody else does. You should be planning, you should be competing with yourself in anticipation of your competitors that are coming down the line. Most of you don't know what a MS-DOS 3.5-inch disk is, or an IBM 5.25-inch floppy disk, but we had those things. I have none in my office. So, so from that came this sequence of events. So let me take you through this. This is not to scale, obviously, but paper spreadsheets, putting numbers in tables and rows is almost like human nature. It's in your DNA. Probably has existed as long as since there was paper and since there were numbers and since there was commerce. And in 1979, the very first electronic spreadsheet was created. It was called VisiCalc. Very, very famous at its time. Really the original electronic spreadsheet. developed by two people who I know who live in the Boston area. And it ran on the Apple II. The Apple II was the first computer from Apple that was super popular. And it was the first computer that showed up in businesses. People would buy Apple IIs so that they could do their simple finance statements or whatnot in VisiCalc. Then around 1981, IBM decided that they wanted to have a piece of the PC market. And IBM came out with the IBM PC, meaning to bring a professional computer into the business market. And Lotus 123, which was essentially, VisiCalc, a copy of VisiCalc with some more stuff in it, but more importantly, that it ran on the new computer, made it very big, very, very big. And it became the dominant software for personal computers, and it's going to credited, or you could reasonably say was responsible for bringing the IBM PC that probably 9 out of 10 of you are using today. 1981, Microsoft, who was at the time small, quite smaller than Lotus, had a product called Multiplan, and it was trying to compete with Lotus, but it was not. I'm sure nobody in the room has ever heard of it. It wasn't very successful. Right around then, 123 is absolutely dominating the market. Lotus's revenue is probably 90%, if not more, from 123. And along comes Pito with this idea of a product that was totally different from Lotus 123, and yet did a lot of the same things and introduced a capability which in our mind at the time was not even the lead capability. It was the third in a list of 3 that we would cite as why Improv was a useful product, but it looked a lot, and I'll show you some pictures in a second. It looked a lot like a spreadsheet, but it had this rearrangeable views or something equally unmarketing to describe what we now call pivot tables. And just around the same time, Microsoft Excel comes out, again trying to compete, but this time on Microsoft Windows. Microsoft Windows is an application that runs on DOS that you have to launch. And then within that, you get this incredibly, well, for our taste these days, bizarre, ugly screen, but you could run Excel. And Excel, kind of like in each case, new platform, new software knocks out the previous platform and the previous software. The new platform is Microsoft Windows. Excel starts growing and growing. Excel at some point, I don't know exactly when, surpasses 123. Then Microsoft surpasses Lotus. And then around, I identified it as Excel 2000, and when the pivot table first appears in Excel. It's a long time ago. It's ancient history. But it is interesting. It was really fun for me to sort of go down that memory lane, and I had a chance to make contact with some of my colleagues. Some of them might be online now, and we were reminiscing. This is my basement, and I happen to collect interesting pieces of paper because I don't know why, but now it's useful. And you look at my shelf there, you see Modeler, then Improv, Time Capsule. You also see a few other ones like Curaçao Time Capsule and Total Solar Eclipse 1998. And E-Room Time Capsule, and I think there's one for my 50th birthday there. Okay, anyway, so in that box, I find this. So there's a product that I came up with, programming with my own 2 hands and 10 fingers in the R&D function that I called Modeler. And it was the result of my work analyzing what Spreadsheet did and how they did it. So basically, if you look closely in that picture, you'll see the beginning of the idea of a pivot table in those bottom 2 diagrams. You notice that it's on page 8 of a 10-page document. So I didn't really make a big deal of it. It was just a thing I had. Also, the word pivot table is not there. So we had no idea this was going to be our biggest and most memorable feature. But along comes an interesting event. Steve Jobs, as you see there, this is my one moment of fame, drinking a Diet Coke with Steve Jobs and Jim Manzi. At that time, again, open your history books. had been kicked out of Apple and had started his own hardware company called Next Computer. And one day he was told about interesting software being developed at Lotus, and he made a field trip to Lotus, and he met with Jim Manzi, who's there, and we all look like children, don't we? Because we are. Jim Manzi decides to organize a little show and tell of all the cool products developed at Lotus to see what feedback he can get from Steve Jobs. And Steve basically falls in love with what I have then, which is the modeler, which is a real prototype, most generous way to put it. But Steve Jobs thinks it's the greatest thing and convinces Jim Manzi, hello, this is not going to work, so I'm going to skip that, the video footage, and I'm going to go to this. Convinces Jim Manzi that we ought to do the product on the Next computer, which is totally incompatible with everything else that exists. And let me look at the time here. I guess I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but basically we come out a year later. Things went very slow in those days with Lotus Improv, and software came in boxes, if you can believe that, and they came on floppy disks, and there was no internet to download new versions. So that's what it looked like. And if you look at the back of the box for Improv, you see the three key features. One of them, the biggest one, is plain English formulas. The second one is dynamic views. That's what we call it. It's really pivot tables. And the third one is so-called advanced graphics. And this is in a box. And of course, the Next computer doesn't do well, but we get some patents. Actually, Lotus gets the patents. I just get this nice plaque. But okay, so I'm supposed to be the inventor of a data processing apparatus and method for a reformatable multi-dimensional spreadsheet, a pivot table. But anyway, that's cool. It's hanging in my basement. Actually, to be really honest, it was sitting in a closet. Okay. But you know, I get a lot of kudos and nice articles are written about it. And it was our proudest moment. But just to remember, my mother, Pito, bisame trovi Kiko e pivot table ita ainda in the company. And that goes on to this day. So I'm glad you all understand what it is, because it's hard to explain even to younger people than my mother. So how does the story end? You see the clouds, right? So Improv is moved to Windows because Next dies. That doesn't work out, so we move it to Windows. Sales are terrible because there's 1, 2, 3, which everybody loves, and Improv, which people are confused by. The salespeople don't know what to do because they're not positioned correctly. So Improv is canceled. Lotus loses lots of money. Chalk one up to Experience. Then Lotus is surpassed by Microsoft. We know this now because Lotus is gone. Lotus is swallowed up by IBM and disappears. And Microsoft and Excel win. But wait, it's always darkest before the dawn. Soon after that, I leave Lotus to start something new with a partner. It's a company called eRoom Technology. It does really well. It grows over 6 years to around 200 employees. And then it is eventually acquired, but in a happy acquisition. I move on, and here I am teaching at Brandeis. So long live the pivot table. Thanks. I'll be glad to take questions if there's a way to do it.
Okay. Well, many thanks, Pito. That was a very nice story, and we're checking the Q&A right now to see if there's any comments, any questions. We see somebody saying c./wp.exe, nice launch command. Another person saying Lotus still exists by name only, Pito. So IBM Lotus Notes. So any questions for Pito Salas? Okay, I see none at this point. If there's any questions, please go ahead and, okay, question. Pito, could you ever expected that the pivot table to have such an impact in the world? That's a nice question.
Is my audio on?
Ever... Come again?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I had absolutely no idea. When the pivot table appeared in Excel in 2000, we all laughed because it was so horrible, so impossible to use. Nobody understood it, whereas our thing was elegant and beautiful. But what we did not understand, and if you Google, you'll find articles written by me and by others, sort of analyzing what happened. The big problem we had was that our product was not a spreadsheet. It was like a spreadsheet. It was similar to a spreadsheet, but it wasn't a spreadsheet. And so there were lots and lots of realistic use cases which would not work within our product. And what Microsoft and Excel did was combine, even though it's a rough combination, in my opinion, combine a spreadsheet with the dynamic views and make something that does a much more powerful job. So I had no idea, obviously. And that's true for everything that's happened to me in my life. I never know what's going to happen. I never anticipate. I just, be ready for opportunities when they appear.
Thank you for that answer. I don't remember who said this, but I believe there's a quote in the lines of the best and greatest inventions are done by accident.
It's a fact. It's a fact. Yes.
Okay. So if there's any other questions that we cannot address right now, we will address them later, but please go ahead and drop them in the comments or in the Q&A section, and we will get back to these. So with this, I'd like to thank you once more, Pito. Looking forward to your next session, which is on Friday, the same time, talking about education and how to get the youth excited about technology. And for now, for the attendees, I'd like to invite you to log off this session, go back to your agenda so you can follow the next session on the list, which will be BI Brace from Jamaica. So thank you very much, and see you in the next session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Excited about technology.